The Apartment Gurus podcast is brought to you by Greenlight Equity Group, an apartment acquisitions and holdings firm co-founded by Carl York and Tate Siemer, host of this show. We offer you the opportunity to be an owner of cash-flowing, wealth-growing apartments without the headaches of being a landlord. These assets are recession-resistant, risk-mitigated, offer significant tax advantages, and are a great alternative to the stock market. Ready to check it out? Go to www.investwithgreenlight.com today to book a personal consultation with Carl or Tate. Again, that's investwithgreenlight.com. We look forward to meeting you. Welcome to The Apartment Gurus, where twice a week, host Tate Siemer brings you deep dive interviews with the wisest gurus in the apartment investing industry. These experts are sure to create game-changing value and inspiration designed to catapult your business to the next level. Be sure to reach out to Tate at www.investwithgreenlight.com for access to his investor portal and Calendly link. And now, here is Tate Siemer and the Apartment Gurus.
Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Apartment Gurus podcast. And listeners, it is Yakov Smart Day on the Apartment Gurus. And that can only mean one thing, which is we're going to deep dive into some capital raising strategies, social media, LinkedIn, really like how to leverage social media and other systems to raise capital and to promote your business, promote what you're doing. Yakov is an expert. I know of you, Yakov, through your LinkedIn work. I've seen your, the thought leadership that you offer around that. And like you said, we were talking offline before the recording. You and I have had an opportunity to meet in the last year or so, and so I'm really excited to have you on the show, man. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's going to be awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So you're zooming in today from Phoenix, Arizona, Scottsdale area. If you would, Yakov, just share a little, your backstory, kind of, your real estate path and how you got kind of into the niche that you're in today.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a great question. I'm going to make a very long story pretty short and concise, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
I started my business back in 2016, originally teaching people how to use LinkedIn for lead generation, work with a number of different businesses across a number of different niches and verticals. That started to take off, authored the book Disrupting LinkedIn, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard of. That was back in 2017. So I was one of the OGs of the LinkedIn marketing game. And then 2020 happened. So in 2020, I had very much an events-based business. So I would do live seminars and enroll people in different programs, offer different services there. And then, of course, that went away. Leading up to that, though, I started to see a pattern. I started to have syndicators reaching out, wanting to see if they could use LinkedIn for finding investors and building relationships with passive investors who could be LP in their deals. I didn't know much about that landscape at the time, but I said, hey, if it works for B2B, it probably works here. It's the same kind of concept. So what we did was we hacked a lot of those B2B strategies and we translated those over into the capital raising space, right? So since 2020, pretty much only been working with capital raisers and real estate entrepreneurs. At this point, we've had hundreds of people go through our programs. And the biggest thing right now, we're having this conversation, it's late 2022, talking about the outlook on investor attraction, right? Because it really capital raising comes from what? Relationships, right? And so our whole focus is on how do you build those relationships online, build trust at scale, because that leads to people raising more capital. And a lot of your listeners have probably heard the stories of someone raising $10 million in a weekend to close a deal, right? Or something like that. What they don't tell you a lot of the time is that person had those pre-existing relationships that they built over months and years. And so there's strategies and systems for building those relationships online, having that happen naturally, and even being able to automate a lot of that process.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Listeners, just to make this very simple, this business is about finding deals and finding dollars. And we're talking about finding dollars today, obviously. And if you can automate and kind of do the LinkedIn thing on autopilot and really get systematic about it, that it's going to be a tremendous source for you. And well said, Yakov, on the relationship side of things. Like, this is 100% a relationship game. It's you could say you're buying businesses when you buy a piece of real estate or property, but really you're buying tenant relationships and tenant well-being, and it's people. It's all people. Mm-hmm. And social media has connected us in ways that is unprecedented on the planet and in human history. So, and I'll freely admit that we have not really maximized our LinkedIn capital raising game. And so I'm super excited to hear from you today and to really dive into this. Talk a little. Obviously, like you said, we're here in mid-November of 2022. The last 7 months or so, 8 months have been a wild roller coaster ride. Let's just kind of start there. What are you seeing as far as investor sentiment, passive investor sentiment, operator sentiment, and what significant changes are you seeing, and how are you pivoting?
So I think one of the things that's happening is people are sitting on money longer. People are needing to see more deals before pulling the trigger, especially if they're a greener investor, right, as an LP. I think that trend's only going to continue. I think a lot of people who are wanting to raise capital, they may have the limiting belief, and we'll call it a limiting belief because that's what it is, that, hey, if there's a down economy, it's harder to raise money. And sort of, but it's different, right? You just want a bigger list, right? Where before maybe you needed 100 people in your investor database to raise X amount. Maybe now you need 150 or 200, right? Or even not that many more. But that's one thing, having more of those relationships. The other thing is having more depth in those relationships. I think nurturing is really key. Things like email marketing, staying in front of people, really understanding them, having them feel like they're part of a true investor club, right? Those things become more important. It opens the door to more precision. So that's what I'm seeing. I think the opportunity, and this is kind of what I'm betting on, personally, in these next, let's say 12 to 18 months and beyond, is we're at a crossroads right now, right? So one thing that's been happening, with a lot of your listeners know, the stock market has been plummeting this year, right? There's been a lot of people losing a decent amount of money in the stock market. So before, capital raising was more of an aspirational sell, if you will, right? It was like, hey, what if you could make passive income? Maybe you save on taxes, get high returns. We're talking about upside. Right now, it's about solving a real tangible problem that's staring people in the face. Hey, you lost 20% on your retirement account this year. You got to do something else, right? There needs to be answers, right? So people are in that mode of really trying to solve a problem, and you have a very real solution, right? Something backed by a hard asset, something that usually has higher upside, less risk, something that's recession resistant, especially if you're doing multifamily. Yep. And so the real gap is in communication, is in building that trust and allowing people to understand, yes, it may sound too good to be true. So yes, but a lot of people don't know what a syndication is. They're not educated yet. But this is a real solution to their problem, right? They can take the money. I think there's something like $4 trillion sitting in retirement accounts that can be put into self-directed IRA and invested in your deals, right? So It creates a huge opportunity for the people that really systematize this and look at the long game as well. Someone may have to see multiple deals before pulling the trigger, and that's okay, right? Because you're going to create more loyalty, more education, more referrals. And this is really about solving a pain and problem. The other thing that I'm seeing just online with marketing and relationship building, some of these trends, is it's continuing to be noisy, right? That's not going away. There's more platforms coming up, more noise, more advertising. I think being in a niche is even more important right now, especially with investor attraction, right? A lot of people who say, okay, who's a great investor for you? Doctor, lawyer, that whole thing. Yeah, maybe, right? Some of them may have money, some of them may have not, actually. But, we talk about in our program streams of commonality, right? So for example, I live in the Phoenix area. If I'm using social media, if I'm using LinkedIn and some of these other channels to build relationships with potential investors, and we both live in the Phoenix Scottsdale area, immediately that's something in common, right? That's something that, can't fake that. That's a rapport point, right? So when we both live here, it humanizes me a little bit more. So that's another trend that I'm seeing called H to H, right? Human to human. You got to humanize yourself more. It's not just about the hard data. It's not just about the numbers and the charts and overwhelming people with information. It's about sharing personal things and creating more of that emotional connection, right? I think that's becoming even more important, especially getting people in the door. And what we're really creating, I talked about this on my podcast actually as well, is we're creating paradigm shifts, right? So the whole point of this marketing and building trust at scale is changing someone's perception, changing someone's way of thinking around what investing actually means, who investing is for, and having them see themselves as a true investor and looking at deals that way, and also looking for the best operators or looking for people who can vet deals for them. So I think there is still a huge, to answer your question, there's still a huge gap in communication, but I think now is actually the time to double down and be marketing more aggressively, to be more precise and to build a bigger list. I think list building has become more important these past few months than I think it's even ever been.
Yeah, totally. And well said. If you're not building your investor database anytime in any market, you're missing the opportunity to raise more capital, do bigger deals, do more deals. So yeah, I mean, this is key. And so Yakov, when somebody like, let's say me with Greenlight Equity Group sits down in front of LinkedIn, or let's just say capital raising in general, what's the most important question that I should be asking myself? How should I be preparing for the activities that go into creating those relationships?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways to look at it. I'm going to give you a few frameworks that anyone can use, right? So the first one is, what's the front door, right? So what do we mean by that? So the front door is something that people can opt into, something that educates people at scale, that runs without you having to be there, right? Because one of the most exhausting things is having to repeat yourself and have the same conversation with different people every day of the week, one-on-one. It can be frustrating, right? So there's frequently asked questions, there's objections that people have, there's concerns. What if you had a marketing asset that could address those, right? So I'm big on what we call investor attraction webinars. These are usually 15 to 30-minute presentation that addresses these things that someone can watch ideally before they talk to you, or maybe have an intro call and they watch it before more of a deep dive call. But it really establishes their credibility, it builds trust, and it also collects the lead, right? So when someone goes and opts in, and everyone listening has probably done this with something online, you enter your name and email, now you're on someone's list. That's the start of a relationship, right? So for example, if I'm on this podcast and towards the end, I give you a website for people to go to, if I just send people to my website, they may be interested, they may not be, but they'll go to the website and maybe I won't have their information. And they'll say, hey, I'm going to reach out, on XYZ day, and then life happens and they forget. Versus if I send people to what's called a landing page or a webinar registration page, they go to the page. The one objective of the page is to give something of value in exchange for their contact information so we can start building a relationship. When I say building that relationship, I'm talking about in an automated, streamlined way, right? Not me calling you every day and like, hey, let's chat, let's connect, let's get to know each other. It's more email marketing, nurturing that starts to happen automatically when you set up the system. So the front door system is really important to have. There's a lot to setting it up out of the gate. We can dive deeper in that. But what it does, it qualifies leads, it builds trust at scale, establishes your credibility, and you're collecting leads. It makes it so you have the foundation for nurturing these relationships, which you're going to need, right? It's not about being a deal broker anymore. It's not about just, getting people on a list and every so often when you have a deal, just bombarding them with emails. It's about actually being relevant and building that trust at scale. So the front door framework is really important. Then we have to look at, okay, where are we going to find these investors online, right? And there's a buffet of ways where you can do it. There's a lot of social media platforms. I'll just list off a few, right? So there's LinkedIn, which we talked about. There's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's TikTok, there's Instagram, there's podcasts, there's having your own podcast, there's YouTube, there's SEO, there's pay-per-click, there's Bing, there's all these different, things that we can talk about. Pinterest, there's different forums online, there's newsletters, there's all these different things. And so the key becomes, and this is where a lot of, real estate entrepreneurs and capital raisers go wrong. They've heard that they have to be everywhere. They've heard that they need to be posting 5 times a day. And it sounds so exhausting that most people, what they do? They don't do anything, right? Or they, try to do it and do it sloppily, or they, outsource some third-party company to quote unquote create content and it's very generic and very bland. So it doesn't really get you anywhere, right? So instead, you're better off going deeper than wider. You're better off choosing 2 or 3 platforms that you're going to focus on, that you're going to use actively as channels for growing your investor database, right? So like when we work with people, and even if you're not working with us, this is something to consider: having a strategic plan, having a 90-day strategic plan. Where are you going to be marketing? How do you maximize those assets? And how do you customize it to your voice, to the investor you're looking for? Okay. Mm-hmm. And the other question to ask is who? Like, who are you talking to, right? So if you're, let's say you come from an academia background, you're a professor at Yale, right? And you can speak well to people in that background, you communicate like them. That's your investor attraction DNA. That's a part of that, right? So those are usually going to be the people who are easiest for you to communicate with. So you're going to speak to those people differently than a tech founder who dropped out of high school, right? It's a different conversation. There's some different values, some different things happening there. So it's important to be specific in who you're speaking to. And the big word, we talked about this earlier, is be relevant to them, right? Especially now, the conversation is so much more about mitigating risk and solving a problem than, hey, we have super high returns. Oh, check out this great deal, right? I think right now, if people don't have the relationship, the deal becomes a lot less relevant, right? It's not about the great deal. It's about the great relationship first.
Yeah. Well said. And this is a relationship first business. Like, it's especially in the multifamily space, which is what the show's about. Relationships are everything. It's not a transactional business like single family where you do a one-off deal with somebody. Ideally, you're doing deal after deal after deal with the same broker, same property managers, same investors. And so like building these relationships is absolutely essential and key. So let's talk for a second about the front door. Am I understanding it that it's like a landing page with a click magnet that people can download a value add asset like a ebook or something along those lines? You capture their info when they do that. Is that kind of the front door?
Sort of. So that's one way to do it. Okay. I don't think it's the most effective way. And one thing, I'll just go on a quick tangent here. When I hear the word ebook, it makes me think of Internet Marketing 2014. So if anyone's got an ebook out there, call it a book, call it a digital guide, call it a digital book, call it, whatever you want to call it, cheat sheet, PDF. Don't call it an ebook, because to me, it just devalues the thing. It's like, yeah. So that's why I soapbox on ebooks. So the giveaway can be a number of things. I'm in favor of webinars, right? Because when someone watches a webinar, what happens, right? It's not just one of their senses that they're engaging. When they read something, it's not as powerful as when they listen to the sound of your voice, right? When they see the visuals, when you walk them through it, right? And we hear someone speak, just like, when people are listening right now, automatically we assume some authority and credibility, right? It creates a deeper connection, a deeper relationship. So my whole thought process is, why work harder and try to do this in this ebook or in this guide, or go really deep when you can do it on a webinar, and then maybe have a guide after someone's opted in, reinforcing another point. So yeah, keeping that front door relevant. But the biggest thing, to really make it concise and easy for people to understand, it's one specific place where you can send people to anywhere that you're marketing, right? You can send people in, they can enter their name and email in exchange for something of value, right? And once they enter their name and email, they're now in your autoresponder or CRM, and now they've given you permission to communicate with them, right? And now you have their information and you're building the relationship. One thing a lot of people don't know in marketing, especially online, and now, I learned this years ago, I think from a guy named Dan Kennedy, the 97-3 rule, right? So basically what that means is any given product, any given service, usually about 97% of the population, they're somewhere in the process of making a buying decision, but they're not ready to pull the trigger right now, like in the next couple of days. And then 3%, they're ready to rock, they're having calls with people, they're ready to make that decision, right? And so if you're not capturing those leads, then you're missing out on 97% of the potential people that can invest with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Talk for a second about the mechanics of the webinar. Is it a live webinar that you record and then people can go back and watch? Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, pretty much. So it's what we call an evergreen webinar, which is just a fancy way of saying a pre-recorded webinar, right? So Ideally, you record it once. It's not a series of webinars. It's not having a bunch of webinars. It's not creating a whole course. It's one webinar, typically between 15 to 30 minutes, that does a couple of key things, right? It overcomes objections. It introduces people to you, shares your story a little bit without, rambling on and boring people with your story, but it humanizes you. It talks a little bit about your investment thesis and your outlook. And the biggest thing is it makes it relevant to people so that they're inspired to take action, that they want to keep, learning from you, that they want to ideally book a call and learn more, right? It's not about a specific deal. It's not about, hey, go here to invest now. It's more of an intro webinar that gets people familiar with who you are, what you're about, and your strategy on investing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes total sense. I love it. Evergreen webinar, anything evergreen is great. Whether that's podcasts or a book like you wrote. Is that book just wildly sick? I mean, I've got to think that it's probably more relevant than it's ever been, and probably helping a lot of people out at this point.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So a few months ago, I have a couple copies sitting on my bookshelf, and I just picked it up and I was like, okay, I wrote that. That was published in 2017. Let me see if it's relevant. So I just flipped open to a page, and sure enough, a lot of the stuff there is timeless. Maybe some of the mechanics on LinkedIn have changed, maybe some of the tactics, but a lot of the ideas and concepts and strategic things, they're still very much relevant. I think, there's still a lot of room. One mistake that not a lot of people, but, a decent amount of people make is they'll say, okay, LinkedIn or Facebook, whatever social media, it's so saturated. People are marketing on it so much. Could I really find investors there? Well, yeah, if you're doing it well, if you're doing it right, you're talking to the right people with the right message, any platform, right? You got to be talking to the right person with the right message. So I think LinkedIn is as relevant as it's been. I think a lot of people are maybe misusing it. There's more noise out there, but that's okay. You can still stand out, and there's still high net worth individuals there that you can build relationships with.
Yeah. Look, guys, listeners, LinkedIn is essential, in my opinion, in this business. Like, you need to have a solid presence there, and just about anything that you need is available on LinkedIn. If you're in Columbus, Ohio, raising capital, and you need, you got a $12 million capital raise and you need institutional equity to get the deal done, LinkedIn is probably a better place to go look for that than anything else that I can think of. I mean, you do a search on Columbus, Ohio, private equity, debt equity funds, like any of that stuff, you're going to get a wealth of resources and a wealth of people that really want to talk to you. So it's huge. And if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn and start building your profile, your presence, and start posting and start. So I know that you teach this stuff and it's in depth, but talk about the basic LinkedIn strategies that you see that work really well as far as attracting investors.
Yeah, so my approach is a little bit contrarian to probably what a lot of people have heard or even tried. So I think posting is secondary to direct messages. Okay. And I'm going to unpack that and explain what I mean. Right. So posting to me is like the supplement of marketing on LinkedIn. So first and foremost, foundation, you need a profile that pops, right? Profile that's investor centric, not just about you, professionally written, that looks good. It's actually filled in. If the profile isn't filled in, you get a lot less visibility on anything you post, right? So it's just one of those things. It's free to do. You might as well get that done, right?
Yep.
Next thing is a lot of people have people on LinkedIn maybe they've worked with before, had businesses with, or people in their current networks. There's usually some gold there. There's usually some people there who have money who you already have an established relationship with, who have no idea that you're raising capital or what kind of deals you're doing if there's an opportunity for them, right? So starting with that reactivation is a great strategy for a lot of people, okay? So beyond that, when we talk about direct messages, what do we really mean by that? So the framework that I teach and our clients use is called MEC, right? So here's what it stands for. We want to think about this like we would think about meeting people in person, right? So if you meet someone in person, Tate, if you and I were at a conference, I walked up to you, I said, hey, how's it going? And you started vomiting for 10 straight minutes, telling me your life story, how good your deals are, how amazing you are, that I need to act now. I would look at you weird, right? And I'd probably want to run because that would just be not human. It'd be just weird. It'd be awkward. So instead, we want to treat online the same way, right? So we want to treat online where, hey, we meet, we say hi. And now what are we doing? How do people usually build rapport? So we're establishing commonality, right? So what do we have in common, right? Do we know some of the same people? Have we lived in the same place? Do we have some of the same interests, hobbies, all these different things? Do we go to the same school? So we're finding commonality, right? So we want to meet, that's M. E is establish commonality and curiosity, right? So anytime you're having a conversation, same thing in person, right? It's a two-way street, right? So if I meet you, we start talking, we find out we have something in common. You tell me a little bit about what you do, or better yet, you tell me about a problem that you solve, and I'm intrigued. You want me to ask, you want me to invest attention, right? Otherwise, I'm not as committed. I don't care as much, right? So just like with in person, online, you want people to be able to invest attention, right? So meet someone, establish commonality and curiosity, and then continue the relationship. Okay. Move those people off of LinkedIn to your email list, or better yet, to a phone conversation. Right. And if if they live in the same town, maybe in-person meetings, if you do that, if it's the right person, that could be worth doing. So again, meet someone, establish commonality and curiosity, and then continue the relationship, right? Don't think that you're going to just sit there and raise capital on LinkedIn and have people wiring you money who, a couple of days ago were strangers because of a couple of DMs, right? So the reason I'm bigger on DMs than posting is, number one, deliverability is much higher, right? When you post, you really don't have control over who sees it, right? You can tag people in a post. Yeah, and that can be powerful, but it can also be invasive if you don't know them, right? And that's one way to irritate a lot of people, right? So direct messages, they get delivered, they get seen. Direct is the key word there. They need to be concise, right? And they allow someone to invest into a conversation, right? All we're doing is we're starting conversations that lead to connections, that lead to relationships, that lead to people investing with you. Okay, so LinkedIn is that starting point. A couple other things with the direct messages. Like I said, I just want to reemphasize the point, keep it concise. Needs to be personalized. That commonality is really key. That curiosity piece is really key. And, some people just aren't good fits. They're not qualified. They're not interested, and that's okay, right? I don't want to say that it's a numbers game. It's more so having the right people raise their hand who express interest. And if they're not interested, if they're not raising their hand, letting the automation, right? The automation do the follow-up, right? Because you want people to filter themselves out, which is okay. And you want the right people to self-select in and show that they're interested. The other big thing, and that I want people to really understand with online, we need to be more concise, especially when it's written, right? When it's text, even the content, it needs to be concise and grab people's attention. You have a couple of seconds to grab people's attention. They could be on the John scrolling, they see your message come in. Couple of seconds, grab their attention. In person, people are going to be more polite, more cordial. You can be a little more long-winded. Online, we've got to grab their attention quickly. That's why every word matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that this is like all the details here, the languaging, the communication, the hows, the whats, the whens. I know that's all part of what you teach. So let's just cut to the chase and talk about a little bit about your program. If who's going to want to sign up, I guess that's kind of obvious, but why would they want to sign up to learn this stuff? And how do they go about it? Like what are the mechanics of the program?
Yeah, so I'll give you a high level overview of how it works. So the sweet spot for someone to work with us is someone who knows they want to raise a lot more capital. Ideally, they've had a little bit of capital raising experience, or at least they've invested as an LP. So they kind of know the process. Now they want to be more of a GP, right? Yeah. Or someone who's already raised, a decent amount and they really want to scale. That's also a fit. So it's a range of people. There's three parts of the program. There's the setup, there's the launch, and there's the relationship. So the setup is when we set up some of these key systems for you, right? So I have a team and they actually go and will set up your front door, your webinar funnel, the automation, your autoresponder, the LinkedIn automation, the targeting on LinkedIn, the initial messaging templates. They'll set everything up based off the frameworks that we have, right? So we call that the setup, right? Once you're set up, you're launched, you're going to receive a strategic plan. So I personally create a strategic plan for every person we work with, showing them saying, okay, Tate, so based on where you're at, these are the lead sources that I would use, right? So I use LinkedIn and these other couple lead sources based on where you're at. Here's where your quick wins are going to be. Here's some of the longer term plays. Here's a strategic plan for the next 90 days, right? That you and your team can go and implement and understand the LinkedIn automation is already running at that point, right? So you got that win under your belt right away. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you're launched, you have access to our Investor Attraction Academy members area, right? And that's where we go into detail, all the how-tos, A to Z, on all the relevant channels, online platforms that people are using for attracting investors, right? So there's step-by-step guides, things that are really going to allow people to implement faster and really get the results and have that be customized on who their ideal investor is. Another concept that I'm big on is fishing in the right ponds, right? I see a lot of people trying to raise capital fishing in the same ponds, right? And it's cool. It might work, but you could say the same thing and be the only game in town, right? And that's so much more powerful. So we want people to have a unique advantage in their marketing and investor attraction. So that relationship piece is when we have that additional support and guidance as you're implementing your strategic plan. And all in all, it's a 6-month program. And I think it's the perfect combination of strategic, personalized guidance, having the right systems built for you, and then that ongoing kind of support to make sure that you've really created a machine for attracting investors, right? You don't have to be in the weeds implementing everything. You can have a VA, you can have some of these automations, but you're the visionary and you're still driving the boat and you're constantly building your list on an ongoing basis. That's the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So listeners, if you want to learn more about this, go to www.findmoreinvestors.com/webinar. I'm assuming, Yakov, that webinar kind of deep dives into what everything we've been discussing a little bit further.
Yeah, it's a great overview. It'll kind of reinforce a lot of these points. People can see some visuals because I know we've covered a lot of ground. So when someone sees some of the visual frameworks, I think it'll make that much more sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's nothing being pitched on the webinar. So if you watch the webinar, you think it's a good fit, you want to learn more, there's going to be a link there to fill out a form, book a time, or we can chat.
Perfect. I was going to ask you what next steps were. So that answers that question. Out of the hundreds of students that you've had, the privilege of working with, I'm sure you've seen, I know you've had wildly successful students. I'm sure you've seen some that have kind of fizzled, not been successful for whatever reason. What do you see as the main differences between those two groups?
It's a great question. So the biggest thing is self-assurance, right? It's the confidence and the belief that, hey, I can do this. And trusting the process, right? So sometimes people are very reactive and they're like, oh no, I don't know if I can do it. And there's a mental block that needs to be overcome sometimes, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is the people who are most successful, they're thinking long-term. And ironically, they usually get the quickest wins. It's crazy how it works. They're thinking long-term, they're prepared, like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna at least committed for 6-12 months. I'm in this for the long term. And then they start getting the quickest traction, right? The other thing is the openness to learning and doing things differently. A lot of our stuff is quite contrarian, as you've heard, different than a lot of like the mainstream marketing advice out there. And so it's being bought in and thinking about it in terms of a system, right? Especially a lot of people, if they haven't had their own businesses before, maybe they come from the corporate world and they're used to, they have to make everything happen versus relying on a system that largely works without you being there and you being at the helm of that vessel, like we talked about, right? So those are a few of the things. We've got a whole section called the capital raising on demand mentality or mindset. And, we talk about kind of these 8 pillars. But the biggest thing, it's that self-assurance, that openness to learning, obviously, being able to implement and also kind of being in it long-term and really understanding it and understanding that, hey, there's no one size fits all. This is the frameworks that work. These are the strategies. Now it needs to be customized to me and have it work for you instead of, being like a lot of people, they're slave to posting, right? They think they have to go post a bunch and then nothing happens and they get frustrated and they're posting more and they ultimately give up. Having the system working for you instead of you feeling like you're working for a system that's not really getting anywhere.
Yeah. So well said. And the main thing I heard there was mindset. Like mindset is absolutely foundational in this space. Listeners, you got to get that part right, because if you believe you can, if you really believe you can do it, you're going to be unstoppable, especially if you're in the long game mentality, right? If you don't believe you can for whatever reason, and there's lots of limiting beliefs that we all have, and we all have them, but if you let those run the show and really don't believe you can do it, there's really not a whole lot that can be done in that whole, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right. Like, I think that was Henry Ford maybe said that. That's so true. And that's what I hear you saying is like, trust the process, work the system. This stuff works. Come in, do it long-term, and automate this stuff so that it's working for you all the time. In an evergreen situation. So Yakov, this is such great stuff. And there's, unfortunately, we're kind of up against time here. There's so many different places we could go with this, but I think what, to me, listeners need to do is check out your webinar. And look, if you're in this business, you are raising capital, like you are a capital raiser, and you need to know how to do it. And Yakov's offering a very unique, in his words, contrarian way of doing this, disruptive. I love that word. And doing so with the aid of technology and the leverage of social media, and the leverage of creating an evergreen webinar that people can go to and learn from. So, Yakov, any kind of like final thoughts for the listeners on your program, or on just generally on capital raising?
Yeah, I'd say this. I'd say there's going to be people out there talking about, oh, raising capital in a recession is hard, or, oh, no one's investing right now, people are tight right now. Don't buy into that BS. Just know it's a time to be more assertive. It's a time to hunker down. It's a time to have better marketing, right? There's more opportunity. I think now we talked about $4 trillion sitting in these retirement accounts. You can really help people. You can really make a difference. It takes having the courage to put yourself out there, and it's bigger than you, right? It's about really helping people. And along the way, you can raise a lot of capital. So, the biggest thing, don't get discouraged, stay confident, have the right systems in place, and double down. And I think you'll be wildly successful in this. So
well said. Awesome stuff. So again, listeners, just to make sure you have this link, findmoreinvestors.com/webinar. Everybody should go there right when you get done listening to this and learn everything you can about what Yakov has to offer. He's the real deal. He's the leading expert in this stuff, especially on the LinkedIn technology and the strategies there. So Yakov, totally appreciate you, man, coming on the show and dropping so much wisdom and knowledge. I'm excited I haven't watched the webinar myself. I'm excited to get off the recording and go watch. I'm it's very compelling. Everything that you've presented is very, very compelling. So thank you, sir. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having this. It's been great.
Yeah. And listeners, as always, thank you. As always, we love you guys. You're the reason that we do this, and the reason why I love doing this as much as I do. Actually, I'll be selfish. I'll confess, one of the selfish reasons is to get to hang out with somebody like Yakov for 45 minutes or an hour and hear from his perspective about what he's an expert in and what his niche is, and have that contribute to my career and my business and your career and your business, listeners. So it's just a total privilege to have the high level, sharp people, guests that we have on, like Yakov. And I feel very blessed and very grateful. So thank you, Yakov, again. Thank you, listeners. We're doing 2 episodes a week right now, getting as much content out as we can to you. And so we'll see you here in a few days on the next episode. Take care, everybody.
This has been the Apartment Gurus with Tate Siemer. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. To contact Tate, go to www.investwithgreenlight.com for access to his investor portal and Calendly link. He loves to hear from you and thanks you for being a valued listener. Just a reminder that you are the guru. See you on the next episode of the Apartment Gurus.